So before we get into the topic today, I want to run through some business stuff. First off, we only have, I guess, 2 more mandatory classes and 1 more not mandatory class. And next week's Monday class, the last day of the semester, is not really going to be a full class. It's mostly I just want to bring everyone in, say thank you all, and ask if anyone has any last minute questions on the paper. So first off, business stuff, which is what I mainly want to talk about logistically. So paper is due Monday the 17th. That is a week from today. That is the official due date for paper 2. If you want to get feedback on a draft, some of you have already sent me a draft, but if you want feedback, I need it by 8 a.m. 8 a.m. on Thursday, which is the 13th. So if you want feedback on a draft like last time, I need the thing in my inbox by 8 a.m. because I'm going to be doing them Thursday morning. So if I don't have them by then, I won't have enough time to get you feedback back. If something's come up and you need an extension, like on paper 1, I am willing to be quite lenient with the extensions. We still are in COVID time. I know a lot of you are getting vaccinations for the first time or your second vaccination. There can be some mildly feeling like crap afterwards. So I would, if you're not feeling well and you need a little extension, let me know. I will be more than happy to give it to you. We'll figure out a reasonable time. The downside of that is if you want feedback on the final draft. So if you want me to give you comments in depth, this worked, this didn't, like on the first paper, I do need it by next Monday. That way I have enough time to, because I'm teaching multiple classes, I need enough time to go through, write out all the feedback. If I'm not giving feedback, I can grade something a bit faster. I still have to read through the whole thing, but just the act of typing and spell checking my own work, I can do it more quickly. So if you're going to be turning in the paper late, you're not going to be able to get any feedback on the final copy. If, however, you don't care about that and you want an extension, just ask. I'm more than happy to offer extensions. If you do want feedback, I do need the paper by next Monday. And if you don't ask me for an extension, it's also due Monday. Also, as I said, with the extensions, it's quite lenient. If it's the night before and you haven't asked me yet, still feel free to ask. Like I would much rather, stuff is coming up, it's a pandemic, the weather's getting nice and none of us know how to socialize anymore and it's causing stress and all sorts of other things. So again, just ask and that's that. Now, other business thing. For the next week, I promise I will be a complete pain in the ass and email you all multiple times and keep repeatedly saying, please evaluate me. So just like I grade you, you please grade me. These are very helpful for me and for the school. For me, there's a part in which you can tell me what worked, what didn't. I can respond. Raven, did you have a question? Oh, no, okay, no worries. So yeah, if you go and evaluate me, here's the website, HTTP. You should have an email in your Baruch email box about this. Also, if expect to get an email from me about it at least 3 more times. Also, this is your chance if you thought I absolutely sucked and you don't want anyone to have to suffer me again, this is your chance to tell them I sucked and they should get rid of me. So whatever works. The other thing is, I will not see any of these evaluations until after grades are due. So if you're like, I really want to say professor was terrible and should never be hired again, but you're afraid it's going to hurt your grade, well, it's not. They're anonymous and they come in after grades are due. So, and I will be emailing you again because it's helpful to me, improving courses for next time. It's helpful to the department to know who to keep around, who should be able to teach other exciting classes. So evaluations, and I will be sending you the link in your emails when I email you another 3 times. And I apologize in advance for being obnoxious about it, but it's very helpful. And I generally find when you get 70,000 emails a day, the only way to get people to read those emails, or when everyone gets 70,000 emails a day, you need to send them multiple times and be annoying. Any questions on the business front? All right. no questions on the business front, I'm gonna leave this up. And if something comes up at any point during class and you want to ask me a question, feel free. But what we're going to talk about today. So today's class, I think, is going to be a bit easier to wrap your head around. It's just a theory that has been come up with. It's not really it's not so much a theory as a view or an explanation of certain paradoxical facts that are given by psychologists that I think are useful things to talk about in our practical everyday lives. So really what I want to do is just begin with this paradox about the world. And then from there, try to understand why this paradoxical set of affairs is the way it is. And what can we do about it? How can you in your everyday life avoid the pain and suffering that goes along with these things? So here's the paradox. When we think about the world, or when we talk about how society is today and compare it to societies in the past, do we usually say that our society today is better, the same, or worse than it used to be compared to our ancestors? Better. Most people generally tend to say that society is better. We generally point to all the ways that society has improved. So what are some of the things that we point to about ways in which society is better? What are some of the things we say? So technology. So yeah, and what about the technology that's better? What does our technological improvements allow us to do? So technology is better. Transportation is better. Is better. We can get necessities more easily. You don't have to hunt for your own food. You can just go to the store and get some. Medicine is much better. Just to take a concrete example, we are having the first pandemic in a long time. But even if you compare the pandemic today to pandemics in the past, what we're dealing with right now is nowhere near as bad as the sorts of pandemics that human beings have experienced in the past. So for instance, today with COVID, I can never remember the exact numbers, but if you get COVID, what percentage of people who get COVID die from COVID? Anyone who knows the statistics better than I do want to say, or just take a wild guess? I guess I know the general idea. But anyone know what about the number is? Yeah, it's about 2%. It's like 1 to 2%. Anyone know what the odds, if you got plague in the Middle Ages, what the odds were of death? So COVID has totally turned our world upside down, higher than 40%. It was somewhere between 50 and 75% of people who got plague died from it. Think about how much 2% has turned the entire world upside down, and compare that with the 50 to 75% of chance of dying. People in the Middle Ages, half the population of cities died. That is a completely different ballgame. So we point to all of these things and we see technology, it's gotten better. We can now talk to people from around the world. If you can stay in touch with people, you can get in touch quickly, the speed. You have just many more options about what you want to do with your life. It used to be that your career was in whatever your parents told you it would be, or whatever their career was. Now, through education, you have many more opportunities. Transportation is so much better. It used to take, weeks to get across the Atlantic Ocean. Now it takes hours. Our necessities, we have food, running water wasn't a thing until the past few hundred years. And there are many places in the world in which there's still not good drinking water. Medicine is so much better. It used to be that medicine, you got sick, you were pretty much screwed. Nowadays, it took them a year to discover a vaccine for COVID. The timetable is just incredibly different. So this is one side. Everything in our typical everyday descriptions of the way the world is suggests that it's gotten better. And generally speaking, when you think things are getting better, you think that, if your world is getting better or your life is better, are you generally happier or less happy? If you go around and say, my life has gotten better, Are you generally? Yeah, it generally means you're getting happier. So we've got all these ways in which society is getting better, or at least we talk about it getting better. And if things get better, then we'd expect people to be, on the whole, happier than they were in earlier times. And yet, how many of you have read about the ways in which depression and anxiety disorders in modern times, what are happening to these things? Are they getting less common or more common? Yeah, they're going up. Depression, anxiety, things like eating disorders. What are some other things along these lines? What about things like gun violence? Stress levels are going up. Stress is going up. What are some other things that are happening tied in with these sorts? Yeah, burnout. It seems like people are always burned out. All we want to do, we're overtired. We feel burnt out. We don't want to do anything. It seems like other things that are going up. 50 years ago, teen suicide was more or less unheard of. Nowadays, it seems like everybody had someone in their high school who committed suicide. And so suicide, another big one, addiction, heroin addiction, alcohol addiction. Just think about the opioid addiction that's taken place. So just the amount of addiction in the world is at levels never before seen. So here's the paradox. So do people know what I mean by a paradox? What is a paradox? I'll write it up here. The marker decides to have any ink left. What is a paradox? Anyone know? If you can see that, P-A-R-A-D-O-X.
It's a contradiction.
Yeah, it's two things that are both true, but they seem to contradict with each other. It seems like what's going on is, yes, it's true that the world is in a lot of ways we think of as better. That's a true statement. And yet at the same time, all the things we'd expect that if things are better, people would be happier. But on the other side, it looks like people are less happy. So what on earth is going on? If people are less happy, more stressed, more anxious, more depressed, but the world's getting better, why? What is it if the world is better? Why aren't we happier? Why does it seem every generation is less happy than the one before? So Alan is, and I mean, let's just begin this way. This is the paradox. This is what we're going to try to explain. And so why? Why think that this is the case? What are some explanations? Because I think every one of us accepts these two things, that yes, depression, anxiety are getting worse. Yes, in a lot of ways, the world is getting quote unquote better. Why are they both true? So Alan's put forward two sentences. Couldn't all the levels going up have to do with us being able to communicate more effectively across the country? Like statistics are easier to gather, and it seems like there's more of these things. So one possibility is that it's just a statistical anomaly. So one possibility is that these things have been the same as before, that these things have actually always been here, and the only difference is we're more aware of them. But so this is one thing, and I think Alan might be onto something, that there is part of this. One thing is we are more aware of these things because we can hear about them from all over the country. However, I think there's also, though, good reason to think that this isn't all that's going on. The facts are that, like, psychological studies have been done to find that things like teen suicide, that if you just take the society, they've done studies, and even though we individually might hear more about them, they've been doing studies on this sort of stuff for a long time. And all the evidence is these things have actually gone up. Another thing is, yeah, so another question we have is social media. So here's a question of, all right, so social media has in some ways, and I think we're right, that social media has increased our stress levels and things like that. But how? What is it about social media that increases our stress levels? Why is it the case? Like, sure, it's something social media like, but what's the mechanism exactly that would cause it? This comparison to others. So what is it though? Why is it that we have these comparisons to others? Why is it that this is more of a problem than ever before? Another thing is bullying. And I think these are all examples of ways in which these modern technologies are able to get exploited to cause harm in ways like never before. But here's the question, why is it so bad? Like, yes, new technology has made bullying different, or it's easier to bully in some ways. But why is it that it seems like there are more people bullying each other? Or why is it that it seems like we're always comparing ourselves in new ways? And why is it that these modern technologies leads us to compare ourselves to others in ways that make us feel bad? Alan is saying I'd say it's more prevalent because before you get bullied at school, then you go home and you'd be good. Now the bullying follows you home via the internet. So I think that's a huge part of it. So what I want to do here is highlight a couple different things. One of the things that is happening is, just generally speaking, the same things that benefit us in society are the things that can lead to problems if they're used in bad ways. So I think that a lot of the factors, one of the major factors for why we're less happy, is a lot of the same things that allow us to do good things, allow us to do bad things and cause pain. So I think that's one of the factors. Marie.
I also feel like on top of that, like LinkedIn especially, it makes you always feel like you need to be productive because somebody's always happy to announce something. So it makes you feel like, you know, you might be behind, or it causes you stress, like you're not working hard enough.
Absolutely. And I think this is actually, and there's a reason why, Grace, I ignored your comment up above. And the main reason I ignored your comment is I was trying to save this one till the end, because this is what the main topic of today is going to be. Grace says one of the core reasons that modern day life and everything else is happening is that modern day living in stress does not match up with our biological makeup from evolution. And this is what I want to argue for today, or discuss today. What I want to talk about is the ways in which the world has become better, and a lot of the things that we've improved upon. In order to improve upon them in these ways, what's actually also happened in the background is that a lot of the ways in which we evolve to be, and a lot of the things that are necessary for us to be satisfied as a species, are now impossible because of the nature of modern society. So Marie says, I assume somewhat jokingly, I just want to frolic in the grass and pick berries. There's an element of truth in the fact that our society as a whole has a lot less frolicking in the grass and picking of berries. And as a matter of fact, we biologically, it seems like, are evolved to need more time frolicking and picking berries. And instead, what ends up happening is these systems that were designed to live in a world in which picking berries was a common thing are now being thrust into a world very different than that. And because of this, the human species is not in a position to survive in a way that leads to mental satisfaction, despite the fact that the surface area things have a lot of benefits, or a lot better. So yeah, now we frolic in the grass just to get a picture for Instagram. And that's so true. The number of people you see who just like hop out of the car for the Instagram ready moment, then hop back in the car, is like pretty impressively high. So I think what I want to do, the way I want to approach this, is just talk about why, like, what is this idea that, you know, why would evolution and the way humans as a species evolved have anything to do with our happiness levels in modern society? Why on earth would it be the case that our modern society is somehow causing us pain in a way that has anything to do with evolution? So why think that, let me think of the best way of framing this question. So think of it this way. No, let me think about a better way of framing this. All right, so what is the tie-in between evolution and the way human beings are? Well, here's the basic idea. The idea is that every animal species, as it exists, is the product of an evolutionary process. That is, every organism has the characteristics it does as a result of the way that earlier generations of that species evolved. And what that means is, well, let's just talk about something like a giraffe. Why does a giraffe have a long neck? What is the evolutionary explanation for why the species giraffe has a long neck? To eat leaves. And why exactly? How exactly did this happen? What was the process by which, it's not like one individual giraffe was like, ooh, there's leaves up there, I need to stretch my neck extra long. What was the actual mechanism by which the giraffe ended up with this long neck? This is Biology 101. It's always good to remind everyone what we mean by evolutionary theory every once in a while, because we're all prone to forget the details. How is it that we ended up with long-necked giraffes through evolution? Anybody? No individual giraffe stuck its neck out extra long. Yeah, natural selection and selective breeding. So how did that work? What do we mean when we say natural selection? It's basically, here's what's going on. You have some giraffes. They all look like this, and their necks are this long. Well, then these giraffes have baby giraffes. And some of these baby giraffes are going to, by pure luck of the draw, end up with extra long necks. And not only will they have extra long necks, these extra long neck giraffes will be able to reach higher trees than the shorter neck giraffes, which means they'll eat healthier, get bigger, get stronger, and create more babies, which, because of the nature of our genes, means that their babies are going to be extra long necked, just in the way that if your parents have eyes of a certain color, you're going to have eyes of a certain color. So the idea is that over time, we're social creatures. I'm going to save this, your big long one, for a second, Alan, because that's going to be the next idea of how we lead to the human case. But generally speaking, this is the idea with animals, and this is how it works. You have a species that is one way, then over time, gradually, the species comes to be a certain way. And the way it comes to be, because all the earlier generations have died off, is a way that is specially designed to exploit its immediate surroundings. So polar bears are white because being white was an evolutionary benefit, where some of the polar bears were born brown, some were born white. The white ones were better able to get food, eat, and create more babies. So over time, all the polar bears became white. But what you see then is, what happens if you took a polar bear and moved it to New York City? How much would the polar bear's white fur help it?
Not at all.
Not at all. And in fact, if you're in like a non-snowy place and you're white, it makes you easier to find and harder to hunt. So if you're a polar bear and all of a sudden all the snow goes away, you're at a major disadvantage. So what we find is species evolve to deal with a certain environment. And what we see is the characteristics they have evolve for dealing with that particular set of circumstances. And then what happens is, if you take that animal and put it in a different environment, it goes very, very poorly. A white bear in a brown forest never finds food. A more extreme case, fish. How did they evolve to breathe? What do they breathe?
They filter through water.
They breathe water. What happens when you take a fish out of water?
They will gasp and then die.
Yeah, they're going to die. It's the same thing with human beings. What happens if you put us in water and tell us to breathe? We die. So the idea behind this notion of a species will evolve, and it's the way it is now will be shaped by the evolutionary factors that influenced it in earlier generations. And so what you can find is, if you want an explanation for why this organism is not doing well now, what you can do is point out the ways in which the environment it finds itself in now is distinct from the environment it found itself in when it evolved to be the way it is. So if elephants are going down in numbers. Why? Well, there's this new evolutionary factor that is influencing their population that they didn't evolve for, namely humans with guns. So in the same way, the giraffe, if all of a sudden all the trees shrunk because it got too hot for tall trees, giraffes would be screwed because they wouldn't be able to eat anymore. So this is the general idea. When you have what I generally speak of as an evolutionary mismatch between the environment that something evolved in and the environment that it currently finds itself in. And when the two differ enough, things go poorly. So what I want to suggest is that this sort of evolutionary mismatch is why human beings in modern society are very often miserable, despite the fact that we have all these benefits and better things. And what I want to say or argue is that a lot of the key features of an ancient society that we evolved to really value are being lost in a modern society. And while we are getting lots of benefits, these benefits are coming in ways that we lose these more fundamental things and are also putting us in situations where our evolutionarily evolved things like our fear mechanisms end up overfiring and causing us a lot of discomfort, even though they were originally in the original environment there to keep us safe and alive. So does this general picture of the structure of the argument make sense? Of the idea is, yeah, we evolved in one society. The society we find ourselves in are very different. And this is where anxiety and things like that come from. So I now want to read out Alan's statement out loud. He says, we're social creatures and have prospered as a species thanks to our ability to cooperate and advance together. Back in the day, our social circles were limited and thus could be controlled easier. But now with social media, there's thousands of people we feel we need to appease, making us much more miserable because we instinctively feel the need to belong, which we do by conforming to what's expected of us. So what Alan just very nicely described is one of the major factors that is different in modern society from ancient society that we evolved for. And what I now want to do is just talk about some of the individual mechanisms that we have that are evolved for a certain environment and now are not properly evolved for our current environment, just like the one Alan mentioned. So the first one he brings up is need to appease / fit in. So the need to appease or fit in, or another one, peer pressure. Peer pressure is a thing that exists in all human beings. And I think there's a good argument to be made, and that I think most psychologists would believe this, that peer pressure and the feeling of it is something that we evolved to have in past times for a beneficial reason. And peer pressure helped us as a species back when we were cave people living out in the wilderness in small groups. How is peer pressure beneficial? Why is it the case that in a small group of people, peer pressure is a valuable mechanism? And what I'm trying to argue here is that literally the way we think is itself a product of evolution and the evolutionary factors that our ancestors found themselves in. So what is it about living in a small group of individuals that would make it beneficial to be susceptible to peer pressure and a need to fit in? So people can get along. Yeah, think about it this way. As a matter of fact, human beings, as a species, evolved, and originally we lived in small gatherings. I never remember the exact numbers, but we're not talking more than like 100 individual humans. And they're generally somewhat interrelated. You've got cousins and other things. And the key here is, as Holland says, the group needs to work together to survive. And you need people to get along with each other and not fight. And so here's the thing. If you're in a group and 99 of the other people want to do something that you believe is not the best way of doing it, as a matter of fact, even if you think it's the wrong thing, so they say we should all go this way to hunt for the buffalo, You say, no, we should go this way to hunt for the buffalo. Well, what is in the long run going to be more beneficial? One, you keep going over and over again and insist, no, we have to go this way, we have to go this way, we have to go this way. Well, over time, people are going to get annoyed with you and they're going to stop listening to you and you're going to lose your position in the group. So if everybody else feels this way, it's better to fit in even if you disagree with the overall situation. Also, the other option of you just say, screw you group, I'm going off on my own to look for buffalo over here. What's going to happen to you in that case?
You get killed by the buffalo when you find them?
Yeah, you're going to die because one human being is not strong enough to take on a buffalo. Buffalo are very big. So what we find here is there is this evolutionary pressure in small groups to do whatever is needed to stay as a member of the group and not get kicked out. And so what we find is there's a good evolutionary reason for a species living in a small group to have to conform to other people and impress the other people who they consider in-group members so that they don't get kicked out and so that everyone supports each other and pulls in the same direction. So back in the day, it was a very smart evolutionary mechanism. It was something that helped our species survive in days gone by, thrive, and succeed. However, what's the problem nowadays? Alan just described it. While I take a drink, you want to describe it again in words for anyone who's not seeing the chat, Alan, or anyone else? Why is this, how does this misfire?
Well, I mean, the way I thought it is, I think a lot of like tribes. And so like within a tribe, like the way we advanced is, you know, you had the tribe, you had your family, you had the tribe, whatever, you had maybe 20, 30 people that you had to like interact with and, you know, keep good with, you know, be, you know, get along with. And now, like via social media, you have like hundreds of people like who you meet one time and then you follow them on Instagram and now you're worried about what that person's going to think of you.
Exactly. Basically what happens is our brain is designed with a simple formula, which is if you are in-group member, I should try to fit in with you. The issue is back in the day, in-group was very small and easily defined and you knew all 30 people. However, thanks to social media, we now define other people of our group in levels that have hundreds of thousands of people in them. And so as a matter of fact, you cannot make 100,000 people like you. It is impossible. There are too many people with too many distinct views. However, our brain is designed to still want to get approval from 100,000 people. And our lower level brain doesn't understand that this is impossible. So what it ends up doing is trying and pouring in tons of effort to impress every single Facebook friend you have, every single Instagram follower you have, every single person on Twitch, on YouTube, on Twitter. And what ends up happening is your body at any time, one of the main ways that peer pressure works is if you find yourself not approved of, you have a strong negative feeling of stress and discomfort, which is designed to encourage you to line your behaviors up with what's expected of the group. So what we're finding is, because we're treating hundreds of thousands of people as people we need to impress, we are constantly failing to impress others. We're constantly feeling judged. We're constantly feeling like we're about to get kicked out of the in-group. And so we have given ourselves, our evolutionary background, when dropped into the Instagram world, is being created that we are giving ourselves an impossible task, namely to have everybody that we interact with like us. And yet we cannot help but feel this way because this mechanism, which evolved for us, is built into our brains and is compelling us to feel terrible about ourselves if we don't get enough likes or if somebody gives us a negative comment. This is a way in which the mismatch between what we were, the original situation and how we evolved to deal with that situation versus the now situation and the different way in which that same mechanism just causes us pain. So this is one of the reasons, the very same thing that allows us to connect and see other people also triggers this need to fit in, this need to appease, and causes us incredible amounts of pain. Does that make sense to people? Of one way in which Instagram, Facebook can cause you suffering, even though, it might be fun, it might feel good. Well, the negative side effect is this way of causing you suffering. Now, another thing I want to talk about that's very useful is fear / fight flight response. And what I want to argue here is that fear, the emotion, the primal human emotion, is something that evolved to help us survive in an ancient world that was like the same ancient world that led to peer pressure being a valuable thing. So first off, what do we mean by fear? What is fear?
It's a feeling from the amygdala.
Yeah, it's this feeling from the amygdala. And specifically, what does it do? What makes something fear? Another way to describe this is fear is a natural kind. Which one? So, side note, I want to discuss what I mean by natural kind here for a couple minutes. What is a natural kind? Well, whenever you're talking about things that exist in the world, we think of them, and this we've talked about before with types and tokens. A type of thing or a kind of thing is a grouping of individuals that all fall into a certain class. So a kind of thing would be like human beings are a kind. Money is a kind of thing. Shoes are a kind of thing. But there are different kinds of things. One of these things that is often taken to exist is a natural kind. Does anyone think they know what a natural kind is? The opposite of a natural kind would be a non-natural or artificial or sometimes social kind. So does anyone know what or want to take a stab at what a natural kind is?
Just non-artificial.
Yeah, so it's a non-artificial thing. It's basically this idea of a kind of thing that is taken to exist beyond any particular society. So a good way of doing this is contrasting something which is taken to be a natural kind with something that is taken to be an artificial or social kind. So contrast hydrogen with money. What is hydrogen in a chemistry class?
And it's an element with one proton, one electron.
Exactly. It's an element with one proton and one electron. If human beings died, would hydrogen still exist? And
yes.
Would the kind hydrogen still be out there? Yes, it would. It doesn't in any way depend on our society. If human society collapsed or changed fundamentally, or if we stopped calling hydrogen hydrogen, there would still be this element out there that exists, makes up cells, etc. How about money? What makes something money? What is the kind of thing money?
The current medium of exchange, like the value of some coins to some.
Yeah, something is money when it is an agreement amongst the society that we will exchange this for something else of equal value. So this could be money. If we as a society decided that we don't like the US dollar anymore, we are instead going to exchange erasers for other goods, this would become money. If our society collapses, the US dollar ceases to be money. Money is an artificial or social kind. It is something that depends for its existence on the society in which it exists. A natural kind, by contrast, is something that is out there beyond the particulars of a society and their practices. So to say fear is a natural kind is to say that while different societies have different words for fear, the primal emotion of fear is something that is the same in all individual humans across the world. And there's a lot of good evidence for this, such as the fact that everyone from every different society seems to trigger the same brain parts in these primal levels of fear. Also, if you scare a baby of any culture, it makes the same scared face. You scare an adult of any culture, everyone has a very similar fear face. So there's this evidence that this emotion fear is this primal, natural kind sort of emotion that is the same for everyone. And which natural kind is it? Well, fear is our response to a perceived threat, is what Alan says, and that's spot on. So what is it that fear does? Why is it that we have fear? Well, just think about it. When you're scared, what is that going to make you do? What benefit does being afraid have? There's a few different benefits. One, it releases adrenaline. And what is adrenaline? It's the hormone that basically allows more oxygen to pump through your system. It's a stimulant. Yeah, it makes you better able to behave. Your body is primed to do something. So this is one thing that happens when you're afraid is adrenaline. Your heart starts pumping faster. Your palms get sweaty. You see better. Your muscles tense up. And so think about this. Why would these be good things? Well, if you're in a situation in which you're afraid, there's generally something that is causing that fear. And what sorts of things in our environmental past caused a person fear? Back when we were cave people, what sorts of things would cause you to be afraid? A buffalo, a charging buffalo, an elephant, a lion. What is the best thing to do when this thing comes? Run like hell. And if you are afraid, your body is better primed to run like hell. Or if another group of people comes to attack your settlement, if you get afraid, you are now in a prime state. Your muscles are tense. You are awake. You see better. You are ready to fight. So this notion of fear is what is generally called, so when you get afraid, there is a low level unconscious reaction in the amygdala, which is an older part of the brain, amygdala. And basically what it does is all this, what's generally called the fight flight response. And this is a response that exists in most animals that is very ancient, and it evolved in a way to prepare us for those moments in which we need to fight or flee. And so we evolved to have this sort of response. Now, there's another aspect of fear. There's another part of it. It's not just this primal sort of immediate unconscious processing. What else happens when you're afraid? What's going through your mind? Sometimes it goes completely blank, but not always.
It's usually in some sort of direction. So rather you have to confront it or you have to run away from it.
Yeah, you can't think as clearly, but there's usually a thing which you recognize. There's a thing in front of you. When there's a charging buffalo, it's not just that you have this primal feeling. It's that you have this primal feeling going along with this situation where it's like, oh crap, there's a buffalo. So now it's not just this primal feeling. It's this primal feeling plus this very clear memory of a buffalo. And so what ends up happening, and this is the other part of a fear response, it activates the hippocampus, which is another part of the brain, and specifically the part that's tied into memory. So what the body does is it not only triggers an amygdala response, it also stores in memory the situation that led to that amygdala response. So for instance, if you've never seen a buffalo before and you walk up to it and then it charges you, well, that's not good. So if you manage to escape, well, the next time you see a buffalo, you're probably going to be afraid of that buffalo because that fear response has been stored by the hippocampus in memory as something worthy of fear. So this is the idea of how fear works. It's designed not just to allow you to succeed in the moment, but also to make you prepared so that if you're ever in another situation like that, you will again be ready to fight or flee. So any other time you see a buffalo, you're ready. You're ready to run. Any other time that a certain other tribe is seen, you're ready to fight. And to make sure that you are most prepared, it will often, these memories are generally quite general. So it's not just like you see a buffalo. It's rather that you now, anytime you hear something that makes a buffalo type sound, you get fearful, you get ready to fight. This fight-flight response is primed and ready to go. Now, the fight-flight response, evolutionarily speaking, is very valuable. It's crucial, and in ancient times, it was very helpful. But another thing about the fight-flight response is it's very taxing on the human body. It's almost like a pull parachute in case of emergency. It releases a lot of different hormones, which over time can take a real toll on your body. So it was designed for extreme situations. You don't want a fight-flight response going off every single day. Your body will break down. You will be unable. Also, what you don't want to do is have this fear response kick off and then you not have to fight or flee, because it's just released all this energy into your body, which is now pulsating through you, making your heart pound extra hard. In a situation which you actually have to fight, that's really useful. But if your heart is pounding and then you have to just like sit under a tree, it's really not useful. So the fear response evolved to help you in these extreme situations that you might run into very rarely back when you lived in caveman times. Now, let's fast forward 20,000 years to the year 2021. What sorts of things now make us fearful? What sorts of things cause you anxiety or cause you to feel like this matters a lot? I need to be at my best to do this. Work, school, social situations. So these days, the sorts of things that are designed to make, or the things that we think really matter, the sorts of things that feel life or death, the things that we're told are going to determine our future, are things like school and work, and specifically things like tests, papers. Now, crazy people on the subway. So, given what we said before, in terms of the way we evolved to deal with extreme situations, this was our system. We have this fight-flight response. So now, and that's the only system we developed. We developed this very primal sort of situation. We don't have another fear response. This is the one we were given in ancient times by evolution. So what do you think happens now when you get into a test, which as a matter of fact is not life or death? No one has ever been killed by a test. It has never bitten you. It has never trampled you. All it is a piece of paper written by somebody who's been told they have to write you this piece of paper. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're mean. But what if you think to yourself, oh, this is a big deal? What response do you think kicks in when you are taking that test? Yeah, the stress, it stresses us, it determines whether we pass or fail. But it's not just that it determines whether we pass or fail. We also perceive it because we only have one system for dealing with stress, anxiety, and fear. What ends up happening is when you get in front of the test, your fight-flight kicks in. When you sit down at a test and your palms get sweaty, that's because your body is literally responding as if this test was a charging buffalo. You are sitting down and you are having the exact same physiological response that your ancestor had when a lion was coming up on them. Why? Well, because your upper brain thinks this is a big deal. This is make or break. And the only thing it does is therefore, your body responds the only way it knows how, fight or flight response. So what ends up happening is, as Holland just said, you end up, instead of staying still and realizing this is one test in one class, what ends up thinking is, this must be an existential threat. This test is not just a test. Rather, it feels like if I do poorly on this test, my life is going to end. Because you are in the exact same brain state you would have been in an actual situation in which you would have died. And that, this adds in. So what ends up happening is there's initially this primal thing where your fight-flight response kicks in. But then there's an added factor where these things combine. So this one here, this existential fight-flight response, then also triggers the one that Alan talked about before, the notion of having to fit in, having to succeed, the social pressure. So what you end up with is your fight-flight response then combines with your need to fit in and ends up creating this overwhelming sense of existential dread, fear, questioning yourself, and just absolute terror. And now, contrast the ancient times with now. How many of you, how many tests have you had this semester? Out of curiosity, each of you individually, just somebody shout out a number. For all your classes put together. 8. So we have 8. More than 10. So let's just say greater than 10. So 14. Now, how often are you going to get attacked by a buffalo in a 4-month period in ancient times? Maybe once. Maybe once you'd get attacked by a buffalo. And after you got attacked by that buffalo, you would then have many hours in which you sat around relaxing to recharge. Nowadays, what is happening is we are having the same sorts of fight-flight responses 14 times in a 3-month period, combined with the fact that once those tests are done, you don't have time to sit back, recharge, and just stop. Because as soon as you finish one test, the next test is waiting for you. Your job is waiting for you. Your social life, with all the pressures that come from a social media-filled life, are waiting for you. So while in the past we had this fight-flight mechanism and this peer pressure mechanism that were beneficial in small groups, that also on the flip side, because of the nature of our lifestyle, we were able to relax after it. Now, though, what we have is a world in which these very same responses are getting fired off at way higher rates than ever before. And yet, also, not only are they happening more, we have less time after each one to relax and like recharge. Instead, the expectation is you go from one test to the next to the next. And so what ends up happening is that and the reason why we do this to ourselves is because our conscious mind is able to recognize that a test is not an existential threat. Our mind knows in a conscious, adult, mature way that this test is not going to attack me. And yet your body doesn't understand that. Your low-level unconscious mind triggers and kicks into a fear response. So your body is being put through a fear response day after day after day. And yet you, high level, convince yourself, I shouldn't be feeling this way. This is terrible. So this goes into something of overthinking. One of the reasons that overthinking is such a problem is that oftentimes what overthinking is a symptom of us trying to explain away these existential threats. Instead of just being like, I am having an irrational fear response because of how my ancestors evolved, we instead say something like, I have this terrible fear of a test, but I shouldn't. Why am I doing this? What caused it? And then instead of just accepting that this is how you're responding, you start to put added pressure on yourself as you start thinking things like, I'm such a loser, I'm scared about a test. Or I get afraid when I have to read feedback on my papers. That is a dumb thing to be afraid of. I'm a loser. No one's ever going to like me. All of these notions of overthinking are things that are triggered when we don't fully understand the mechanism by which our bodies are basically being put through life or death responses over and over again in non-life threatening situations. And these just pile up. And this, in a lot of ways, is what burnout is. It's putting your body through what your body feels is an existential, life-threatening situation over and over again, and then going back into it again and again. And here's another, is this making sense to people? It's just like the mechanism by which what was originally a very helpful evolutionary response is now getting triggered in ways that cause us huge amounts of pain. And much of the reason why these things are coming up are because of the way in which our brains are just not designed for the society that we're in. And we got here because we followed along with the more obvious benefits. And in the way, we lost some of the more fundamental necessities of what it takes to be a happy human being. One other thing that is extra dangerous, and one other thing that makes this so hard, is that, as I said, when you have these fight-flight responses, what ends up happening is that it's not just that in that moment you feel that you have this existential threat. It's also that it triggers that hippocampus memory response, so that it's not just that you end up having this feeling of an existential threat. You also now remember that existential threat, and it gets triggered anytime you go back into a situation similar to that. So back in the day, you didn't have to worry about running into buffalo all that often. Nowadays, though, think about like your first day at work, your boss yells at you, and that triggers this fight-flight response. Now, it's not just that you're going to have a fight-flight response whenever your boss yells at you. It's rather that you're going to have a fight or flight response every time you enter the building, because your amygdala has been triggered, and then the hippocampus overgeneralizes and thinks, oh, any situation in this building is going to be a dangerous one. And that's how you end up with the very act of going into school is causing you pain, or the very act of dealing with a particular person causes you stress. And you literally, your body is triggering these ancient evolutionary mechanisms in a world that it wasn't designed for. And Holland puts this very nicely. We haven't evolved as quickly as technology has developed. And that's really the crux of the issue, is we live in the information, the digital age, and yet we're still operating with a Stone Age brain. We think of ourselves as masters of the world because of the technologies, but we're still, as Alan says, we're still bound by the same rules of our ancestors, the same psychological rules, the same mechanisms. So what we have is a world, it's basically like, when you're wondering, why am I so stressed in the modern world? The answer is basically the same answer as, why is it that a fish can't breathe out of water? Well, because it's not designed for that. It would be as if fish develop little, because we are so intelligent in terms of problem solving, we were able to create societies that filled our more immediate needs for food and things like this. But we, along the way, lost our connectedness. So another thing, the other reading that I assigned was about addiction. And what they find is addiction, while there is a lot of individual differences around things like addiction, one of the major causes of addiction is this notion of displacement. And it's this idea that levels of addiction go up when people find themselves moving around into new locations where they don't feel a member of a community or don't feel part of something bigger. And so another thing about humans is we are designed, because we evolved in these small social groups, we are designed to crave this feeling of community. And it's the reason why a small friend group is so fulfilling, or why a small group of people is so satisfying. And if you're not getting that sort of feeling because of the nature of the society you find yourself in, people turn to other ways of finding that sense of relaxation, that sense of belonging. And very often it's a matter of turning to things like drugs to cover up this feeling of emptiness caused by the society you're in. So all of this is basically just the general idea here is one of the major reasons why people have so much stress and anxiety is we have these old-fashioned brains in a modern world. So then the obvious question is, what the hell do you do about it? What on earth can you do if, because I don't want to end on like a totally pessimistic note of you're totally screwed. Because I don't think that the case is that you're totally screwed. I think that there are ways of making the modern world a little bit easier. And I think part of the goal is just to remember this stuff. When you're getting stressed during a test, one of the biggest things is don't beat yourself up. Don't overthink, because what overthinking very often is forming judgments about these feelings you're forming. It's feeling bad or judging yourself for something which you're treating as an existential threat, even though you consciously know it's not an existential threat. So instead of going, I'm an idiot who's scared of my papers, go, I'm a human being who evolved to deal with threats in this way. And my system is a Stone Age system that, of course, this is how it's going to respond. I don't get mad if I get a pet fish and I take it out of the water. I don't get mad at it for dying. In the same way, if you are getting very stressed about a test, don't get mad at yourself. Yeah, Alan says learning and practicing Stoicism helps too. Yes, Stoic philosophy can be very helpful in this sort of situation. This idea of trying to understand what things you can control in the world, what things you cannot, thinking about them, engaging with them, and not forming these higher level views or these higher level feelings about it. Other things that can be helpful is suggested Stoic readings. I can send some out. The most famous Stoic philosopher, and probably the one that, I mean, it's an extraordinarily enjoyable reading by itself. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius are really fascinating. I don't know if that's how you spell his name. Ryan Holiday is my favorite Stoic author. Okay, so Alan also says, yeah, and there's been a push recently amongst Stoic philosophy has made it kind of died. It's gone like so many theories in waves, but in response to the modern world, Stoicism can be very helpful. Marcus Aurelius is a fascinating man. He was a Roman emperor who basically the meditations are basically his diary. And they're just a really fascinating read of somebody who was, at the time, one of the most powerful people in the world, and just like his personal thoughts about what it took to try to be a good man doing the right thing in a world where he was basically in charge of millions of people. It's just a fascinating thing to read. It's an incredible insight into the mind of a Roman emperor. So that's one. Other things to do is just like, I always say be easy on yourself. Another one is do things that allow you, to the best of your ability, to reintroduce some Stone Age elements into your life. So like things like exercise. If you have the time or ability just to get some in. This is another way in which like our ancient ancestors spent much of their time walking, running, anything like that. And there's a lot of evidence that these sorts of exercise really do improve your mood by changing hormone levels and things like that. So if any type, like, and the other thing is with exercise, we're also not evolved to like exercising. So, you know, if you're exercising and you're not having fun, don't beat yourself up. Like that is normal. We evolved to preserve energy, but we had to use exercise to get the food we needed. Now we've gotten to a point in which we can avoid exercising if we want to and still eat. So these are the sorts of things that can be really helpful in, yes. I mean, I've cried when I exercise, I've thrown up when I exercise, but I generally find like it can and if exercising for you, that's fine. Another thing is, again, don't overthink, don't beat yourself up, don't think how you should be, except in the sense of I should, find an exercise you like, or just find something else that allows you, even something as simple as just relaxing and building in time to relax. And yeah, emotions and trauma get trapped in the body. Another thing is if you are feeling, if you're feeling emotion, like a strong level of emotion, one thing you can literally do is just let it out of your body. They've done these studies in which very often you can, with like if a bird gets hit by a car, the bird will sit there and like twitch on the ground, and that will help it like re-regulate its body. And human beings, because we're so afraid of being judged and we have such a strong emotional thing, will often stop ourselves from doing this. And yet it can be really helpful just to let that excess energy, the emotion, the trauma out. And that's one thing. Exercise is a way in which social pressures, like it's a somewhat socially acceptable way of letting that energy out. Also, literally things like just like screaming alone in your house can help. Your neighbors might think you're crazy. I mean, I know mine do, but sometimes it happens. How can you avoid overthinking? One of the toughest things in the world to do. One thing I generally personally have found helpful is just be aware when you're overthinking. That is the first step, is just be aware and be like, oh, I'm overthinking right now. Because as soon as you recognize that first thing, it can be very helpful to just kind of reel it in. Because another issue that can come up is oftentimes overthinking can be problematic, because remember I was talking about these hippocampus responses of extreme levels of stress in response to, you get in a similar situation and it triggers it all over again. Well, sometimes what happens is in the process of overthinking, you imagine the very situation and set it off another time. So sometimes just anything where even if you feel like I have a problem I need to solve, just practicing going, no, I don't. And one thing that can be very helpful, I'm terrible at it, but meditation, I've tried it many times, and there's been a lot of really interesting research that meditation does help with overthinking, because what meditation does is it forces you to basically exert prefrontal cortex control, which is the part of the brain that is in charge of impulse control. It basically, what you're doing with meditation is every time your mind wanders and you pull it back, you are strengthening your the connections in your prefrontal cortex, better able to allow you to control your emotions. So if you can do meditation, not everyone finds it comfortable. Yeah, even 5 minutes. And yeah, they've literally done things where people who do 5 minutes of meditation, there are literal differences you can see in an MRI of the prefrontal cortex gets denser as there are more connections. So I'm gonna say I'm really bad at meditating in the sense of I don't do it as often as I should, but that is something which can be really, really helpful. Any type of breathing exercises are very helpful as well. Another thing that can help with overthinking is anything that brings you back into your own body. So very often, I know some things like tapping I've used before. So if I'm feeling incredibly stressed, you just like you can look up how to do it online with more details, but it's basically just you find different parts on your body and you just tap them repeatedly. And anything that forces your mind away from thinking about whatever your thoughts are and into the moment, into the now, can be very helpful. So basically, so today's goal was to be a little bit practical of like, if you're anything like me and you find the modern world stressful, overwhelming, and there are times you are just burnt out, why is this the case? And also, what can you do about it? So whatever, and if anyone ever has any interest in these things, I think Stoic philosophy is a great thing to point to. If anyone else wants to talk about any of this stuff ever, I'm happy to. If you have any thoughts of your own you want to share either with me or with the class, feel free. All right, so that is we're now done, our period's over, but just businessy stuff for those of you who came late. 1, papers due next Monday. 2, there is an optional class on Wednesday where it's going to be about, basically, I'm not sure how many of you have taken a philosophy of mind class, but the main reading is going to be Mary's What It's Like to, or Frank Jackson's Mary thought experiment of what it's like to see red, and whether there's any type of dualism in the mind, or whether it's basically about qualia and phenomenology. And so if you want to engage with that on Wednesday, feel free. We'll also talk about some inverted color spectrum stuff. It'll be very informal. Next Monday, I don't know what the plan is for next Monday yet. There's not going to be any reading for it. I can promise you that. So and it's going to be the sort of thing where if you're all like, I want to just go and work on my paper, then I'll say, go and work on your paper. And if anyone wants to sit around and have a pizza party, I'm happy to sit around and have a pizza party. I can't get you the pizza, unfortunately, unless you want like emoji pizza. The other thing I'll say is if you want feedback on your papers, I need them by Thursday at 8 a.m. The drafts, I mean, if you want draft feedback like last time, Thursday at 8 a.m. If you need an extension, reach out to me. But as I said at the start of class, if you get an extension, I'm not going to be able to give you in-depth feedback on the final draft just because I'm not going to have time. But again, I'm going to be very loose with extensions if you want them. I will see everyone either on Wednesday or next Monday, and expect a whole annoyingly lot of emails from me over the next few days saying grade me on the Baruch evaluation thing. So I will see you all on Wednesday or next week. Have a good one. If you have any paper questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Absolutely.